So, what was it like to be African American? I'll talk about the century from the 1850s to the 1950s and let you know that African Americans were considered second class citizens. As a matter of fact, before the Civil War, they were considered property as slaves. And so, as we move forward through time, we'll find out that African Americans suffered from discrimination and racism. And sometimes it was individuals that did it, and sometimes it was institutions that did it. But African Americans found a way to make a way out of no way. One of the prime examples is if you look at the photographs, it's Comstock's Row. It was a place where African Americans came to live when they first came here to Grand Rapids and work in the barrel factory. But many of them found other jobs and moved out of there and got their own lives together. They started things like churches. You see Old Messiah Church. They started organizations like the NAACP. You see a picture of that group there. And they started businesses like the Lamar Hotel and Horseshoe Bar. Well, how many people lived in Grand Rapids at the time? In the maybe 292 people in 1884, 681 people in 1900, and about 1,000 people in 1920. So the population in Grand Rapids for African Americans was always pretty small. Discrimination hadn't taken place yet, so people could get jobs. If you look at the photographs, the guys working there, lumbermen, almost every picture we found, whether they were working in the mine, the gypsum mines, or they were working in the river, or they were working in the lumberjacks, there were always one or two African Americans there. So if you worked hard, I would imagine you could get a job. Not only that, you could prosper. If you look down, you'll see J.C. Craig's barber shop, and it was the first one in Grand Rapids to have electricity. You see the Women's Study Club. These were ladies who worked during the day, and on the weekends they'd get together and meet. There were a lot of organizations and social groups for black men and women to join.
So where was baseball played in the early days in Grand Rapids? Well, if you look down in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see a horse-drawn streetcar and a field with some trees on it, and there's a congregational church in the background, which is still there. That plot of land is now Veterans Memorial Park. It was just an open area back then, even before the trees were there, and kids played ball there. They probably played a game which we refer to in modern parlance as town ball. Town ball was kind of a wild, free-for-all kind of game. It was almost like a combination between baseball and dodgeball. Instead of bases, they had stakes. Instead of set teams, any number of people who wanted to play could, men, women, children, didn't matter who you
Do
were.
they play that now any place?
They do. They played in Cooperstown, New York, where they have the Hall of Fame. They have a
Mm-hmm.
farmers museum there, and they still play it there. Well, the way the game worked, like you said, they had the stakes. The only way you could get an out is if you caught the ball on a fly, or if you soaked your opponent. Soaking was hitting someone with the ball, and people didn't throw at their heads, at least unless they were pretty mad at somebody else.
Yeah.
So that's how early ball was. The first team was actually a cricket club. There are a lot of people who came from the British Isles who played cricket, so it was natural that they had an interest in it. That was in 1859. That was called the Pioneer Baseball and Cricket Club. They were followed by some sort of haphazardly put together teams, but the first official one was the Kent Baseball Club. That was organized in the late 1860s. That team actually practiced at what is now Kent Country Club. There was an open course there. Well, it wasn't no golf course. It's just an open field. That's where they practiced. They played about one or two games. It's hard to get a record of exactly how many games they played because the team didn't last very long. It lasted probably somewhere into their second year. It was a bunch of young professionals. Probably the oldest person there might have been 28, 29. And what happened, because these guys did not grow up playing baseball or any ball games, they were subject to injuries. They had a lot of broken legs, broken arms, broken hips, and basically they ran out of players.
Yeah.
So that's what happened to that.
Wow. And then you got their Island Park. Island Park uh, was very popular place for players to play. That looks like Van Andel after a hockey game. You got a bunch of cars and horses and trucks out there for a baseball game. And of course, Ramona Park, that's where East Grand Rapids is now, right?
Yes.
And that was one of the places where a lot of the African American ball players played. Chicky Candy Bar Giants and Jess Elder's Colored Athletics both played there at Ramona Park.
Even though there weren't a lot of teams at that time, and there were certainly no black teams, Grand Rapids had become a place where baseball was popular. And there were a lot of traveling black teams that realized that this was a good place to come and play. They brought entertainment, enthusiasm, and competition to the city.
Yeah, two of the earliest teams were the Adrian Page Fence Colored Giants. And down in Adrian, Michigan, there was a fence company that decided that they wanted to promote their company by sponsoring an African American team, and they were one of the very first teams to play baseball, organized baseball. There was a 15-game World Series played here at Ramona Park again, and they played the New York Cuban Giants. You'll find in dealing with black baseball, there were a lot of Cuban teams, and hardly any of them were Cuban. They use the word Cuban a lot of times because it was put them a step above African Americans. And some of the owners who were really racist would rather hire a Cuban team than an African American team. But the Page Fence Giants were quite an unusual team because their owners actually bought them a railway car. So they didn't have the same trouble that some of the other barnstorming teams did, places to stay and eat. They could stay in their own car and go from city to city. They also had a sponsor, the Monarch Bicycle Company. So they had these bikes that they would use, and before game, they would get on their bikes and ride into town and hype the crowd up, make it the place to be at that afternoon. And the Cuban Giants were a very interesting team too because they were playing baseball for a hotel. They were mainly waiters. They were in New York City. And after a while, they got tired of being exploited by the owner of the hotel. And they said, we're going to start our own baseball team. So they went off on their own and started a baseball team and became actually the first fully salaried pro black baseball team. There was a very troubling time for them because there were other teams in New York at the time. Even in this card, you can kind of see it says original Cuban Giants on it, and it's because the ones that left called themselves the X-Giants, and you'll see that a lot of times, Cuban X-Giants. That means they were Giants, but now they're not, and then the rest of them put original in front of their name. We're the original Giants, or we're the authentic Giants. So this was a very good time for baseball to start. We have even stats that say that they played the Cincinnati Reds, the Adrian Fence Giants did, and they actually lost to the Cincinnati Reds, but they were ready to up their game to play some teams that were higher priority and higher status.
One of the things, too, about the Cuban American Giants, and a lot of teams use that name Cuban over the years, is that they had their own language. No one could quite figure out what they were saying to each other, and that added to the mystery of their team, and it made it more fun to watch. One of the first prominent players, white or black, in the United States was a young man named Bud Fowler. His real name was John W. Jackson. He changed his name to Fowler early on, and then he became Bud because that's what he called everybody else. Part of the reason he may or may not have changed his name was that he might have been worried about what his family would think about him playing baseball, because it was frowned on by a lot of people. Bud played for at least 35 or 40 teams in his career. He played over 22 states that we know of, and he also played in Canada. And he was one of the first blacks to play in an organized baseball league. It was the International League, and he and his teammates were driven out of the league because white players didn't want to play with him, so that took care of that. He also played for Greenville in the Michigan State League, and he played for Adrian, as George mentioned, with the Page Fence Giants. He and the gentleman in the bottom wielding a bat rather menacingly is Home Run Johnson. Got his name because he hit 58 home runs one year. And my guess is, given the fields they had to play on, he probably had to leg out all of them. But the two of them joined together to form the Page Fence Giants. And before that, they played for another team in Adrian. And what's remarkable about that is that they replaced a Hall of Fame player. There's a famous baseball player most people who love baseball know, Honus Wagner.
Yeah.
Played for Adrian back then. And he and his buddies got this idea that they could make some more money playing for Louisville in the National League. So the Adrian team was left without players. The owner started looking around and said, hey, this Fowler character might be pretty good for us. So Bud joined their team. So he's one of the few guys to have ever replaced Honus Wagner on a baseball team.
And you wonder why a guy that could play so well, skipped from team to team to team. And it was pretty much racism. I mean, we found statistics that said that some of the owners would fine players if they played with him and fine them if they played against him. And so he couldn't win, though he was a remarkable player, a second baseman. From what I've read, people have quoted and say he might have been the best second baseman playing baseball at the time. And all of that, and he not only was he one of the best, he didn't wear a glove. So can you imagine playing second base and being one of the best without a glove? Yep. He was a player that, being the only African American playing, players would try to hurt him. He invented some wooden shin guards, like they wear now, I guess, the catchers wear now, that he could use, made out of wood, so that people sliding into second base to try and spike him wouldn't tear up his legs. But he is a Hall of Famer now, and it's such an unusual thing because he was born in Cooperstown, New York, where the Hall of Fame is.
After the turn of the century, it was clear that baseball was becoming quite popular in West Michigan and Grand Rapids in particular. At what point, there were at least 40 local teams in 8 different leagues. Softball was very popular. They had 56 fast-pitch softball teams in 9 leagues. There was even an indoor baseball league. Grand Rapids had a championship there in 1928. There's also a women's baseball league, which people know about. The Chicks played in that one. So a lot of people came here. They actually came here to get a job playing ball.
That's actually right. And even in the African American community, as small as it was and as few males as it was here, between 1900 and 1950, we counted maybe 60 different teams. Now, some of them were only there for a season. Some of them were there for a couple months. Some of them didn't even get on the field. But Grand Rapids produced a lot of African American squads that were professional, semi-professional, amateur, and some of my favorites. We listed some of them here. I love the name. I see these in jerseys. I wish I had a jersey with the colored Invincibles on it, or the East End colored hard hitters, or the Franklin Fuels, and the Cooks Brown Dolls was a ladies team that was a softball team, and they all came here from West Michigan or somewhere locally.
One of the first teams in Grand Rapids, one of the first black teams, it was around 1900. It was started by a man named William Mabin, who off and on was associated with the team for several years after that. Now, the picture shown here was from 1917, when there's some prominent people you see there. The guy on the left is a guy named Nick Mabin. That's Bill's brother. And as you see, Nick is hiding his right hand. He was a star pitcher, but he had suffered an injury when he was young, and it damaged his hand. And while it made his fastball do a lot of crazy things and made him tough to hit, he was shy about it and never showed it when pictures were being taken. Halfway through the lineup, you'll see a man, probably the fourth one over from the left. That's Walter Coe, who became one of the first black police officers and detectives in Grand Rapids. And then there's a man in the middle, on the far right, and he's 15 years old at the time. He's Floyd Skinner, and became one of the city's most prominent attorneys.
Yeah, this 1917 team, picture of the 1917 team, kind of evolved after Mabin had it, and there's been some debate on who was managing the team, Mabin or Jess Elster, who had at not that time he just joined the team as a catcher, but took it over in 1906 and became the face of baseball in the community. Jess Elster did. The team at the time had lost to Sarasota, a team here in Grand Rapids, 46-6. They had raggedy uniforms and a bad record. And so when Jess took over, he looked for speedy, strong players to field his team. And in a short time, 8-9 years, they became champions of Michigan.
Jess Elster, who was shown in the last picture, by the way, in the far right in the black sweater, was a master entrepreneur, and he ran the team off and on until 1950. During that time, he worked tirelessly to book games, draft players. He even formed with Stanley Barnett. Barnett had a hotel downtown. It was called the Waldron House now, but that's where a lot of the blacks would go to because they couldn't get rooms anywhere else. But he and Jess Elster formed the Colored Athletic Business Association in 1914 to support the team and to support the black athletes who played for the team. Jess worked often from his home. You'd look in the newspaper every spring, yep, Jess is going to have another team, but he'd have a number for tryouts, he'd have the field listed, and he'd have a phone number so you could call him for bookings. One interesting thing is that one of the guys who did the booking for him was a gentleman named Abe Saperstein, who people may or may not know was the guy who formed and ran the Harlem Globetrotters.
Yeah.
So he also played to the crowds. One of the things he carried with him it was a rabbit's foot. And there'd be stories about how the rabbit's foot was taken from a rabbit under a full moon in Egypt on midnight of All Souls Day, and he knew what he was doing, but the people liked it, and that's what made it was fun. It was fun to go watch the games because of that.
Yeah, the press ate it up. As a matter of fact, he was dubbed Mr. Baseball in the city of Grand Rapids. There at one time supposedly was a white Mr. Baseball and a black Mr. Baseball, but he was Mr. Baseball, period. He coached for 46 years, and his teams didn't back down to anybody. He played up and down the whole west side of the state and went international. I believe they went to Cuba and other places to play, and his team became champions at one time. GF mentioned that Jess was really had an entrepreneurial spirit, and he was not averse to bringing other entertainment into games. Sometimes you might see a jazz band, you might see a choir. Here you see the Crispus Attucks 59 Jazz Band, and Crispus Attucks Club actually had a baseball team of their own, but their band would play at different games, we see the posters for the Flying Nesbitt's. The Flying Nesbitt's were a high wire act, a black high wire act that accompanied not only the athletics but Detroit Stars, and they kind of followed the leagues around. There were other one-man band, the Paul Clown's one-man band show, King Tut, and the Cannibal Zulu squad that they played that wore grass skirts. But his entrepreneurial spirit led to his legend. I mean, you go to a game and you get a baseball game, but you also might get the Sunday choir.
But for all the extra acts, there was a Balloon Ascension, for example, at one time. But for all the extra things that were done, the idea was to draw crowds. And one of the things Elster wanted, and that you see in the fields that are shown on these slides, is they all were fenced in. And that was perfect because that way you could contain the crowd. It was easier to sell tickets and keep an eye on people.
Get more money that way.
Get more money, yep. And both Jess and later Ted Raspberry brought in some, I would call them baseball extras to spice up things. There was a gentleman named Juan Padron who was a big star in the Negro Leagues, a Cuban player who actually ended up starting his own teams here and later worked in East Grand Rapids and in fact was buried here in Woodlawn Cemetery. Satchel Paige pitched here a couple of times. There's one story when he was supposed to pitch and they couldn't find him, and it turns out that Ted Raspberry had to go get him because he was fishing in Reed's Lake and had forgotten about the game. Dizzy Dean also pitched here. Dean was a little bit past his prime, but he was still a crowd favorite, and again, that kept things going. That got people to come and watch.
And you know, the thing is, where did they play? I was surprised digging through the research of all of the stadiums that were here in Grand Rapids. You know, you had Island Park, John Ball Park, of course, Recreation Park, Alger Park, Fountain Park, Loyalty Park. They're scattered all over. Fountain Park was at the corner of Fountain and Grand. Recreation was on South Division, south of the railroad tracks. Loyalty Field was at Hall and Ionia. Island was 131 in Market Street. And the other thing I saw in the reading is that one would burn down, they'd take the parts over and they'd build a new one, or they'd recycle the parts. And if one needed repairs for the stadium or the seats, they'd take them from another stadium. So very efficient, I guess, is what you could say. But Grand Rapids did have they had all these teams, so they had to play somewhere. So they had these ballparks all over the community.
As the popularity of baseball grew in the community, especially the popularity of the black teams, sponsorship became critical. You look at the bottom lower left is a team that you've heard of before. That's the Page Fence Giants, and they're actually posing with the fencing that they had nothing else to do with
right.
at John Ball Park. This is around 1896. The team in the upper right is called the Chicky Bar Giants. They were sponsored by Frank Lamar, who's on the far right in the photo, the one wearing the hat. And that building on the left is actually the Chicky Manufacturing Company.
People always ask, where's this Chicky Candy Bar Company?
Yeah, and that's where it was. And in fact, you look at the building closely, and it's now the site of the St. Vincent de Paul building. It's the same building. You look at
on Division?
Yeah.
On South Division, yeah.
And then you look at the team photo, and there's a young man named John Shackelford, who's on the far left, kneeling down. And he actually came to Grand Rapids to play ball. He had a law degree from the University of Michigan, came here to start his law practice and to play baseball. And he played here for a number of years before moving on and starting teams elsewhere. He also had a record in the Negro National League, so he was a pretty prominent player.
Both black and white companies supported these teams. Some of the ones that supported just the African American squads, but other squads too. The Dixie Gas Company, Kelly's Ice Cream, Fox Jewelry, who's still around, Chicky Candy Bar we just heard about, Adrian Page Fence, Pierre Marquette Railroad, and Finniss Oil, to name a few. Some of the African American people who supported the teams, there weren't very many African American companies, but just Elster himself used his own money to support the team. Frank Lamar, of course, who had a hotel and bar, the Horseshoe Bar, supplemented one of the teams. John Shackelford, once he stopped his playing days, did support the team. Stanley Barnett, who we heard had a hotel down on Ionia Street, also one of the few places that blacks could stay. And Ted Raspberry himself, all supported the teams, and it was something that had to be done because the money for the teams, as GF said, if you didn't play in a stadium where you could collect the money and get part of the gate, you were up in the air whether you would get paid that day or not if you were on a open field stadium. So support was something that not only that the companies found was important, but they were getting publicity from it and certainly helped the teams. So you heard about Ted Raspberry moving from Mississippi to come up and play with the teams here in Grand Rapids with the colored athletics, but he soon showed his entrepreneurial spirit and led him to strike out on his own. So he launched the Black Sox, the Grand Rapids Black Sox, in 1947, and Ted also tried to get the team admitted to the American Negro Leagues. And the Negro League bosses pretty much said Grand Rapids didn't have enough black people to support a team in the official league. So the Black Sox barnstormed for a while when Ted moved them to Detroit and changed them to the Detroit Stars. But in 1950, I believe, they were champions. And Ted did all this while running about 4 businesses and became a true asset to the community, to the black community. He was with the Kent Cap anti-poverty program. He helped get the Sheldon Complex started, and he did a lot with youth baseball. And in this picture, Jeff, do you know some of the people in this picture?
Yeah, there's a couple there. If you look at the top row, the third man in is a man named Jelly Taylor, who had a career in the Negro National Leagues. And the bottom lower left is Reuben Smart, who also did. And both of them,
Reuben Smart.
Yeah, both of them. Anybody over the age of 50 would probably knows who Reuben Smart is if they went to public school, because he was quite a fixture there. But both these gentlemen realized that by the time the color barrier was broken, they figured they were probably too old to get a shot. Whether they were or not, that's what happened.
You see here a picture of Ted Raspberry with the great Jackie Robinson shaking hands. And 1947 was a time when Jackie Robinson broke the color line. And it was monumental in the African American community. It was a big celebration. But as anything, as any good thing, there's sometimes bad things. And while it was a monumental step for African Americans to be playing in the major leagues, it also symbolized the slow decline of the Negro Leagues. There was, when Jackie Robinson signed and Larry Doby signed a couple months later in the major leagues, a gentleman's agreement that was there from the very beginning of baseball to keep blacks out of the major leagues. And also, once they signed, there was a 2 Negro rule for most teams. Fortunately, the Dodgers again stepped to the plate and signed more black players, and then the other teams followed suit.
Yeah, even with that, it took until 1954 where the Dodgers put 5 black players in their lineup that things started to change.
Yeah. it, in the black community, the end of the Negro Leagues meant a lot of things. It meant that the major leagues were integrated, but back home here, it was the end of many jobs and businesses because integration had now become law and people could go anywhere they wanted to. Some of the black-owned businesses and leagues suffered. As a matter of fact, you might know a little bit north of Grand Rapids is the resort town of Idlewild, who suffered the same thing once integration came in and people could go to Las Vegas or go anywhere. These historic African American towns and leagues started to decline, and so it was one of the things that people kind of looked at as a blessing and a curse. Ted was a savvy businessman, though. He had many jobs. Tell us about one of them, GF, that I know Ted started. He sold his team.
Yeah, he sold his team in 1961, and then he started a basketball team called the Harlem Satellites. Did that for a while. He also had a lot of businesses throughout his career. Every time I found a story on him, like one time he was a tailor. I think he ran a barber shop at one point. One of the promos for baseball games was Ted Raspberry's heating company. So
heating company, yes.
He was a resourceful gentleman.
Yeah, yeah. And Negro Leagues, they played I think they played the last All-Star game in '62. And the last team playing in 1966 was the Indianapolis Clowns, and then the Negro Leagues were gone. I mean, there were barnstorming teams, I guess. There's always a few barnstorming teams, or some of the like Globetrotter, like sideshow clown shows that were more entertaining than they played real baseball. So Minnie Forbes, who is Minnie Forbes? Who is Minnie Forbes? She is the last remaining owner of a Negro League team still living in the United States today. And she owned the Detroit Stars from 1956 to 1958. Ted Raspberry is her uncle, taught her baseball. When she was young, she played with the Cook Brown Dolls, and they were, I think, a softball team, traveling team. But she learned the paperwork part of the game early in her career, and then once she took over the team, she knew what she was doing. Fortunately, we were able to honor Minnie last December and look at her as an icon in this community. The African American community has not supported her. There's other women owners of Negro League teams that are in the Hall of Fame, the baseball Hall of Fame. Minnie is not, and so we had the opportunity as the African American Museum and Archives to honor Minnie. We also brought along some other Negro League players here in Grand Rapids that are still living. Ray Richardson, you see in this picture, Johnny Walker, and Daniel Gross, all members who played on Negro League teams sometime during their careers.
We had referenced the National Baseball Hall of Fame, but there's also a Grand Rapids Hall of Fame for all sports. That hall lists a number of worthy players and teams, such as Bob Sullivan and the Sullivans, the Grand Rapids Chicks, West Michigan Whitecaps. But outside of Mr. Raspberry, there's really no mention of Jess Elster, Minnie Forbes, the Black Sox, the Colored Athletics, and public figures such as William Mabin, Walter Coe, Floyd Skinner, and Juan Padron. Maybe their time will come.
And not only were they famous in their own right playing baseball, but Walter Coe, for instance, he became a police captain. John Shackelford was a lawyer. He was a player, manager, executive. Juan Padron, the excellent pitcher that lives in East Grand Rapids. Frank Lamar, who had the only hotel where some of the players could even stay. You know, we did get together, I think it was 2004, I believe, and dedicated a field off of Sheldon to Ted Raspberry. And that's the only marker that we know of around town that honors these great players and owners and managers. And you know, a call to the Hall of Fame would certainly help their cause because most of them should be in at least the local Hall of Fame. The African American community is indebted to these players and supporters who still seek recognition. It's obvious how their careers intertwined with the general history of Grand Rapids. We here at the Grand Rapids African American Museum and Archives is committed to making sure that they get their time in the sun. We do exhibits and we collect memorabilia and we do oral histories to hopefully get the word out that Grand Rapids has some pretty awesome people here.
And there are places where you can see at least people getting some attention. There's a baseball exhibit at the Grand Rapids History Center at the Public Library. Among other things, black baseball is featured there. There was a video that was done by Grand Valley State University called Brushback. And the fans of Valley Field sponsored a day a couple years ago honoring black athletes. In fact, they had a Chicky Bar resurrection where they're actually selling Chicky Bars.
I think the Whitecaps do something too.
Yeah, the Whitecaps have too. So there's more to come. So stay tuned for that.
Hey, thank you all for listening. And we'd like to thank the Grand Rapids Historical Commission and all you baseball fans out there who want to know more. Contact the History Detectives and we'll get back with you.
Thanks again.